Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore Podcast. My guest today is Alex McDonald. Before I jump in it with him, whether you guys are streaming this on iTunes, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or Spotify, or watching the full video on YouTube, do a huge favor. Like the show, subscribe, rate it, leave a review, comment, send it to a friend. It helps immensely, and I appreciate it more than you guys know every single time you guys do that. So jumping right in, before I get in with Alex, for anybody who doesn't know Alex, Alex is the guy who ran 5 marathons in 5 days, fasted. How's it going, Alex?
I'm doing well. Super excited to chat with you, JT. Thanks for having me on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you reached out on YouTube, I believe it was. You made a comment, and I was like, oh, that's the guy, because I've used you a ton of times, and not trying to jump ahead where we talk about this already, but anytime somebody brings up, well, you have to have carbs, you're going to die. You'll be dead by the time you get, 6 feet onto the onto the course. And I'm like, well, there's a guy who didn't eat for 5 days and ran 5 marathons. Like, you can't tell me that. Like, come on. So I've used you so many times. So when you commented on video, I was like, oh, perfect. Like, I got to get you on. But before I jump ahead,
yeah.
How did you find keto in the first place, and how long have you been keto?
Yeah, okay. So keto, I fell into it a long time ago. So it was, call it late 2010. So I'm, nearly 14 years now that I've been, call it keto. Back then it was like low carb. Keto sort of started, you call it a couple of years later, those sort of names, and the terminology has shifted. But so late 2010 is when I started. And I started because, I read a book by a guy, Art Devaney, who was kind of in his, I think it was mid-60s at the time, and the guy was crushing it. He was a beast that had the blood markers, the strength, testosterone levels of like a guy half his age. And that's really where I started. I was like, you know what, this guy's doing something different to everyone else, and he's like absolutely crushing it as a kind of in his later years, where he's not just sort of playing with his grandkids. He's like first picked on the team. And I was like, I want to be this guy. So I read in a little bit about what he did. It was not very sciencey. It was just the evolutionary approach. So cut out all the garbage, all the processed stuff, lift heavy things, and just sort of move like your body should. And he dominated. I went, you know what? I'm going to do this for a month and see how I go. And then after that, kind of dial it back, find that middle ground again, just a bit of an experiment. And in that month, I was like, oh my God, this is like life-changing. I've never felt better in my life, and there's no possible way I could go back. So then it became, right, let's dig into this and figure out why, because I've got the results already and I want to understand it. So started low carb, went further into kind of down the kind of keto spectrum, and just sort of continued to cut out a few of the kind of like the paleo sort of end of things, cut out some of the stuff that you would include on that sort of diet. And then just kind of kept pushing it until I ended up eventually at Carnivore about sort of 4 or 5 years ago. And it's the best I've ever felt. It's like, just want to add that other stuff back in. I feel like I'm sort of moving back a little bit and not as healthy as I otherwise felt. And from there, that's been it. So been on a very long journey. And from there, I've tried to study and understand as much as I could, just in terms of the science, and explain like what is going on. And once you learn a few of those things, you kind of can't unsee them. And it's just like this. It just, everything makes sense. All the paradoxes that we understand around diet and nutrition disappear. And I try and attack everything from every angle, just trying to break it, and do as many experiments along the way to experience it. And really, I figure I can understand something best if I get my hands dirty, pull it apart, and live it. And that's certainly what I've done for more than a decade now.
That's awesome. And I love the way you illustrated how you found it, because so many of us do, right? We try it, and then we can't figure out why we feel so good. Like that. I mean, like, I kind of understand. You're like, I removed a bunch of crap, but so for my case, about 3 or 4 months before I started Carnivore, I did a whole food diet for 90 days. Mm-hmm. Like, no processed foods, no alcohol, nothing, lean meats, vegetables as much as I could stomach, fruits, that kind of stuff. And I didn't feel good. Like, I was like, man, I feel like I should be feeling better. Like, I honestly don't feel any different. I mean, I started to lose some weight and stuff, but I was like, I don't feel any different than I did when I eat like my favorite junk food. So why would I do this? I was like, this is silly. And then Carnivore was instant. Like I was animal based first, but it was instant. I was like, okay. And so many people, when they argue with keto or carnivore or animal based or whatever it is, they go, show me the studies. Like, show me the studies on how it works. And I'm like, I call it the PubMed diet. I'm like, if you want to live your life based on PubMed, do it. I am going to do what my body responds to best. And then, like you said, I'm then going to go back and try and figure out if there's a plausible explanation, or is this just, am I hopping myself up on on stimulants and eventually I'm going to crash?
Yeah. Yeah. And look, that's what I did my first experiment I did was actually in 2012. And I think you've done one similar. It was at the time I'd been, call it a couple of years into this, and people would see what I would eat. And they're like, there's no way that you should be the size of a house by now, because I was eating a lot. So I went, you know what, let's test this. So I went, you know what, I'm going to keep a food diary, do so religiously. And I did that for a crazy amount of time, 9 months. I was just shy of 1,000 meals is what I recorded. And I included everything, lived a normal life of what I was doing, and tracked my weight and everything along the way. So it was kind of like, let's just smash this calories in, calories out thing. So I averaged just under 4,000 calories a day for 9 months. And anyway, I tracked everything. And in that period, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was so long ago. I've got all the data still. But I think I put on like 2 kilos of muscle and maybe 1 kilo of fat over like 9 months. And I did 0 exercise. I was actually injured at the time and couldn't do anything. And it was like, right, everyone's telling me that, no, what you're doing is wrong. You're going to blow out. All this stuff's going to go wrong. And it's like, well, okay, let's track it and see what happens. And it definitely didn't. Like, I've been doing this for so long, and all the stuff that was supposed to happen to me, definitely didn't. And the more that sort of happened, you kind of start to question other things, like what else have we got wrong? And that really lit the fire in me to go, okay, we really need to dig as deep as we can to go to the source of the truth. But like you say, everyone relies on these studies, and it's like, right, well, let's sort of test this out. And a lot of these studies contradict each other, and the rest, it's like, all right, there's so much more at play when you in the academic world, that it takes a sort of a certain mindset or a discipline to be able to still think critically, I would say, and really understand what is being presented.
How do you explain that, right? Because common, like I'll say knowledge, for lack of a better term, would be you're not a huge guy, right? Like if you were 6'10" and 450, then I'd be like, okay, you probably need to eat a lot. But I'm not that big. I'm 5'10", and I fluctuate between 190 and 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And so when I did mine for 4,000 calories, I was like, this is excessive. I do not need to eat 4,000 calories in order, by your standard layman's terms, in order to maintain myself. Because most of the time I don't. And then, I lost weight over a couple weeks. So when you dig in, like something happens and then you dig into the science, and then people are like, well, how do you explain it? What is your explanation for why you could go, 9 months, not really exercise, and essentially you're the exact same weight?
Yeah. My theory is, look, we all think that our brains are smarter than our bodies, but the reality is it's the other way around. Our bodies are designed to handle anything that we throw at them. So they maintain a level of homeostasis. So it doesn't matter what you throw at them, they're going to figure out what's the right balance and what to do. So my simple explanation as to why I didn't blow out and get as massive as I did, because my body understood what it needed to do. So it's not as though the only option when I eat food is to I either burn it or store it as fat. You know what I mean? Like my body goes, no, we've got way more than we need. It figures out a way to get rid of it, and only maintain that homeostasis, which is homeostasis is obviously with maintaining your levels of hormones and everything. Everything from body temperature, it doesn't matter. But I would argue as well in terms of body composition, like your body knows what it needs to carry all the time. And we do get that wrong in the current age because of not the quantity we eat, but what we do eat messes with all those natural mechanisms that can maintain that homeostasis for us. So we're shortcutting this stuff that is breaking the system, or our own, by system, I mean our own body. The mechanisms that are inherently built into our bodies. So yeah, that's kind of my logic around it. I mean, you can get deep into the science there, but I think it's got to pass the pub test as well. It's got to be, look, does this make sense? Like, is it, the fact that we've survived and we've evolved over millions of years to get here without having to, decide what we eat, and maintain, our bodies because of our brain power, like what we're choosing to eat. Show me another animal in the history of the world ever that has ever had to do that. And the fact that every animal alive today is still here to tell us, like, to be here, speaks volumes. That, look, our bodies just figure it out.
That's exactly how I describe it when the same thing, because I don't know if you saw, but I then turned around and ate 4,000 calories of standard American, and I handled it really well, except for like a bad eczema flare up. I honestly didn't gain. I think I gained 6 pounds, but a lot of it was water. So like when people ask, I'm like, yeah, I maybe gained like a pound or two of fat.
Yeah,
but eating that much just pure junk, right? Like I could sense it was starting to mess with it, but it really illustrated to me what you said is, and what I say all the time, I was like, your body has this level of homeostasis that it wants to stay in, and it's going to do whatever it can to stay there, which means if I influx it with more calories than I need, like you said, it gets rid of it. And so that's been one of my deep dives is, and I attack it kind of playfully with the Seco bros and the calories in, calories out guys, but I want to know that because I was a gym bro, like for the longest time. I would tell, if you ask me, Jason, how are you going to lose weight? I'm like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do 50% of my calories from protein, 30% is from fat, 20% is going to be from carbs. I'm going to start at about 2,500 calories, and then I'm going to work it way down, and I'll end up at about 2,000. I'll start ramping my my cardio up, and I'll be shredded. And I'm like, it's a science. Like, I got it down. And then I realized, yeah, it's only a science if your body's working the way it's supposed to. Like, if you are on point, then yeah, I can manipulate weight pretty easily.
Yeah.
But when we start, like you said, when you start introducing these foods that start messing with you, now all of a sudden you're eating the same amount of calories that you were 10 years ago, and you've gained 15 pounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it's, and then when I would dig in deeper and people would go, well, why? Like, well, how do you do it? And so the couple things that I came up with is, well, for one, like your body can raise its cellular metabolism, which I think is interesting because there's actually studies with keto where given the same number of calories, the more they reduced the carbohydrates in the low carb group, the higher their resting metabolic rate went up. And I'd have to go look, but I think it's like 60 calories for every 10% that they lowered the carbs. And so just there, like just the amount of foods can change your metabolic rate.
Yeah.
And then you have, different thermodynamic inefficiencies, and then you can excrete calories, and then like all of this stuff. And I'm like, how did we get to the point where we reduced it to a simple equation that says you're going to gain weight if you eat more calories than you burn?
Yeah, it's just madness. And like, I'm very much a believer in the evolutionary approach. So look, I love digging into the science and trying to understand things. Like, my background is not nutrition. I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be an academic or a doctor or a nutritionist or anything, but I have a burning desire to understand things, probably deeper than most. I'm willing to go deeper. But every call it claim that I hear, I think it's really healthy to, what I do is lay that against or compare it against the evolutionary approach, going, does this make sense? So if someone says, look, this thing that was created in the last year is absolutely essential for you to have optimal health, I'm like, really? Like, how on earth is that possible? Like, it's an extraordinary claim. And my view is, look, if you've got an extraordinary claim, I need to see extraordinary evidence, because you're flying in the face of millions of years of evolution to say that you've just created something that is better than our body has ever been exposed to, ever. Like, come on. Like, we really need to think about that. But so many people just go, yeah, okay, great, I'll take this new thing and I'll do it. It's like, I'm sorry, if it doesn't fit evolutionarily, I've got a big question mark against that, any of that sort of information.
I totally agree. And it also, I look at how something, so the big one that comes up, I'm not the biggest anti-seed oil person out there,
Mm.
but I've seen how they make it,
Mm.
right? And there are certain things where I'm going, you cannot, there's almost nothing in nature that we can create better. Like somebody's going to probably listen to this and be like, oh, there's actually this, this, and this.
Yeah.
But from a general point, like you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Nature always does it best. Like that's why the healthiest diets, even everybody promotes whole foods. Why? Because we can't create food that's better.
Yeah.
So you're telling me that this absolute bastardized process of making vegetable oils is healthier than the fat that we have literally survived on throughout our entire existence.
Yeah. It's just madness.
But yeah, so it's crazy. So I definitely want to get into some of the science, especially when it comes to performance.
Sure.
At what point did you decide when you were keto? Have you been a runner like your life? And did you just transition or did you become a runner when you started keto?
Look, I dabbled in it for about a period of about 18 months. So this would have been a decade before. About that time, about 2012. So I trained to do like my first half marathon, and I, with some buddies as well. It was like, right, let's do this. We'll set ourselves a goal and we'll do this. And, but I was already low carb or paleo at that time. So I was doing things a bit differently to everyone else. But since then, look, I did well. I ran my first half marathon, ran a reasonably quick time, which was satisfied my goal. And then, I think through injury, I just didn't maintain it. I took some time off and I wasn't, didn't want to commit to running that many Ks for so long. So it had been a decade since I'd run and even attempted my marathon. So look, the other thing is, like, I didn't do this as a demonstration of how to run marathons. Like, I'd never actually run a marathon before. And look, and I'm not going to lie, part of that was intentional because what I wanted to demonstrate was, I want to demonstrate the amount of energy available in our bodies and kind of smash that myth that, look, people think you can't get through a marathon. Like, we can talk about performance and what's optimal, but people are like, no, I'm running a marathon before, never run one before, so I need to jam all these carbs in just to survive. I'm like, you know what? I totally disagree with that, and I'm going to show it to you. So being a non-athlete and a non-runner, like, I kind of have to say I'm a runner now because I've done 5 in a row, 5 marathons. But prior to that, I'm not a runner. Like, I'm your ordinary guy. I just applied the principles around being fat adapted to demonstrate that, we can get through an enormous amount of volume of work without having to, take in any exogenous any exogenous carbohydrates through our diet. So just really wanted to smash that myth, because once you understand that, look, don't run marathons, but there's so many other ways you can use that amount of energy in your day. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like, who wouldn't want to have that amount of energy available to them?
So you had never run a marathon when you decided to run 5 in a row?
No, never done it.
See, I had this notion that you were like, you're like, yeah, I'm a casual marathon runner. I run a couple a year, and then you're like, I'm going to run 5 in a row. But so how did you even come up with the idea? Like, I understand that you wanted to like disprove this, but where in your mind do you go, I think 5 in a row would be good?
Well, look, to be honest, I stole the idea. Now, let me explain. There's 2 things. So one was, being sort of low carb keto for so long, my energy levels are through the roof. And I got sick and tired of telling people, like, guys, I'm telling you, I've got more energy than you don't understand. They're like, yeah, you're just sort of saying that. I was like, okay. So to scratch that itch, would sort of demonstrate that, look, this is a real thing. And can I do something that makes it irrefutable that, yes, I do have this amount of energy? So that's kind of one part. And the bit that the real closer for me was, I followed the lead from a doctor in the UK, Dr. Ian Lake. So I suggest all your listeners look him up. He did something quite astounding. So he's in his mid-50s. He's a type 1 diabetic, and he corralled 7 others with him to do 100 miles in 5 days, completely fasted. So he wrote a medical paper off the back of it. It's called the 05100 project is what he did, and he's got a website and everything. So I came across that. I'm going, right, this guy's not a runner, and he's mid-50s type 1 diabetic, and I followed his progress, and all 8 of them absolutely smashed it. He had like some sort of similar age women that have never run marathons before. He had an ex-Olympian in there as well. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, this is so great. And I thought, what a great way for me to have a crack at that. So he did 100 miles, which is about 4 marathons. 5 in 5 sounds cooler. So I went, let's just run for that. And I went, you know what, this is a great thing, because not only just to demonstrate sort of to the world, but just to myself as well, and go like, am I kidding myself here? Like, is this a real thing? And being able to do it myself, I'll go, you know what? I don't care what anyone says. If anyone tells me it's impossible, I can now say, look, I've done this. And I kind of had that vision of my kids in class where they're learning about, you know, the calories in, calories out, and saying, you know, you can't run a marathon without carbs, and kind of go, my dad did it. And like, you know what I mean? That sort of moment would be like a really powerful one for me to go, you know what, we are actually changing the narrative. So look, I have the utmost respect for Dr. Ian Lake doing what he did. And I reached out to him. I said, look, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? Can you advise me and talk me through how you went about it? What was it like? And how difficult was it? And the feedback was, look, fasting, easy. The amount of energy, never an issue. It's more just the injury side of thing you need to worry about. And just, you know, strategies around maintaining electrolytes and the rest. But the things that most people would think were really hard were actually super easy. So the fasting, the hunger, and the energy levels, like tick, 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 they were just not even on the radar of an issue I had to deal with.
How did you feel during them? Like, did it change from 1 to, I mean, obviously it would change from 1 to 5 because of, you know, the fatigue factor, but mentally, physically, like, how did you feel as you're progressing through all 5 of these?
Yeah. So look, mentally, I was sharp all the way through, and I've got, it's probably the world's most boring footage, but every single kilometer that I did, I recorded me saying, right, okay, 35 and the pace I was doing. And then randomly to kind of, I'm doing this by myself for the first 4 marathons. So, you know, if there was some thought going through my head, I recorded me saying it. So I did that purposefully for 2 reasons. Look, you can track me on Strava and see that I actually did it, but I've also got video footage of every single kilometer of that 212. Plus I've got me just having a chat. And like, you know, my stories are terrible, but what it does show is, look, am I off with the fairies, or like, am I, you know, what's my state of mind? So, and look, I even took phone calls while I was doing it, because I'm not running it at like flat out pace. Like, I'm doing it to heart rate and just trying to maintain, just sort of get through the volume, because my objective was very clear, just get the distance done. But a few times someone would call and, you know, I'd back it right off and just walk while I chatted with them. And some of them, you know, on work phone calls had no idea I was actually doing marathons, because it wasn't until I'd finished it and they saw a post or something. They're like, hey man, were you like doing this when we chatted? I was like, yeah, I was. So the reason I'm telling that story is, look, if the person on the other end of the phone that's chatting to me on work related stuff, so like I'm in finance, sort of, it's, you know, we're talking sort of very specific things. If they couldn't tell that I was, you know, mentally I wasn't as sharp as I otherwise would have been, I think that's also a pretty powerful statement. It was only on reflection that I realized of that. So mentally, totally fine. Energy levels, totally fine. The only time I felt hungry was when I recorded it each night to say, like, am I hungry or not? Where, you know, if you ask yourself that question, your answer is always kind of, but it was never like 10's ravenously hungry, 0 is not even thinking about it. I hit maybe a 3 on one of those days, like I wasn't hungry at all. And energy levels, like I had plenty. Not once do I feel, let's call it tired, like, man, I just need to rest, I need to sit down. None of that. What the part that was really difficult was my ligaments and tendons just were absolutely copping and pounding. So they're very different, to call it the big muscles, like my quads and calves and things, like they didn't get sore, nor did they get tired. But taking another step when, look, I explained it, I finished basically with sprained ankles. Well, not basically, it was grade 2 sprains on both my ankles. So taking another step or continuing to go when you've got sprained ankles is a different beast altogether. So, and the part that was, I would say, it took a bit of effort. It took some mental game to be able to go, right, I've got sprained ankles today and I've got to run another marathon. Like, okay, we need to lift here. But there were a few mental tricks that I did to get me through that, which, and the more you do it, every time you sort of get through one of those days, you feel stronger and more of a beast than you were the day before. It was like, let's crush it. So when I got to that final marathon, which was the official Sydney Marathon, there's 30,000 people at the start line. I had that personal moment of fulfillment, looking around going, you know what, every single other person on this start line has not just run 4 marathons in the last 4 days to be at this start line. It's like, just genuinely, I felt like an absolute beast to go, you know what, I'm going to go head to head with you guys. Admittedly, like they'll all crush me because I'm not a runner and I've done 4. But either way, I've turned up and I'm going to give this a crack and I'm going to finish this now because I've put in so much. So mentally afterwards, I felt stronger than ever. Like it was a really powerful, life-changing experience doing this, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
That, like, as someone who hates running, I'm like, man, like, I feel like a heart attack coming on. Just
too.
So that then brings me like to another point, because so I have a background in athletics, and a lot of what I do is not necessarily like, I don't just want to be like an average person. Like, an average person can eat XYZ and live, right? I enjoy eating this way. I feel good. It's helped me with a bunch of stuff. But if I got in, I like to lift. If I started working out and after 20 minutes I was gassed and I couldn't, I felt flat and all this stuff, I probably would change my diet just for that, right? So that's my approach to diet, is I still need to be able to do the things that I can do, because at the end of the day, I don't want to be average, right? Like, I want to be at a different level than other people. And that sounds like conceited and selfish, but like, I think you understand.
Yeah.
If you're capable of doing it, I want to be able to do it. And so I have, dove into the performance aspect of it as well, because you always get that, right? Like, can't perform.
Yeah.
In your research, what have you, and you can go a little more in depth, how do you, identify the ability to perform without carbohydrates? Because our entire lives, we're told that you need carbs in order to perform.
Yes. Yeah. So, and this was part of what gave me a lot of confidence to do what I was doing, and also to give me, to be able to strictly adhere to my diet leading into this, to maximize the probability of me being able to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So, to dig into it a little bit, so just to explain, so our bodies have, let's call it 2 metabolisms. So we'll frame those as you're either carb adapted or you're fat adapted. So you're using carbohydrates as your primary source of energy, or you're using fat. Now, the world has kind of been wedded to the carb adapted way of doing things. So, and we'll use calories. Look, I don't agree with calories, but look, let's just use those as a metric to give some, let's say, determine the magnitude of the different size of these fuel tanks. So in anyone's body at any point in time, the maximum amount of energy you can carry with you in the form of glycogen stored on your body is about 2,000 calories. If you eat more than that or convert more, your fuel tank is only that big. Think of it like a small glass, okay? It overflows and then it becomes fat, but that's all you can use. Your fat stores, on your other hand, are a function of how much sort of fat you're actually carrying on your body. So look, I'm very lean. I'm 14% body fat according to DEXA. 14% of some people would say sounds a lot, but according to that, I'm, for my age, in the top 3% of lean individuals of the population. So there's 97% of the population at my age that are fatter than me. So I am lean, and I've got 100,000 calories of available energy. So big fuel tank in fat, small fuel tank in carbs makes a lot of sense. But the bit that gets lost is how quickly can your body convert both of those fat stores, because they're not energy themselves. You must convert those to energy in the form of ATP. So at what rates can your bodies convert those forms of energy into, forms of fuel into energy? So the average person, when you're carbohydrate dependent, your metabolism converts carbohydrates to fuel at about I think it's about 2.3 grams per minute, which is quite a lot. So I think you've got a small fuel tank where you're sucking that fuel out really quickly. So you need to if you're only using that fuel tank, then you're going to have to top it up, which is why a lot people are wedded to that idea of, look, I must jam a gel or eat something because I've got to refill this fuel tank that I'm churning through really quickly. Those same people, fat adapted, are only going to burn or convert their fat to energy at a rate of around about 0.3 grams per minute. So very, very, very inefficient, put it that way. So everyone's burning both of those fuel tanks, but if you're limited by which of those fuel tanks tap out first. So when you're carbohydrate dependent and you've gassed your small fuel tank. Doesn't matter how big your big one is, because you need both to survive or to function. Now, when you become fat adapted, that equation completely flips. So both of those rates of conversion really level out. The carbohydrate rate of burn drops down to about 1.3 grams per minute, and the fat conversion to energy increases up to about 1.3. And now I can go way beyond that for the super supreme athletes. I'm not that, but let's just say they're now equivalent. So they've leveled out. So what you have now is, as I'm, for the same amount of energy, I'm dipping into 2 fuel tanks at a rate where I'm burning them the same, but I'm not tapping out on my small carbohydrate fuel tank pretty much ever, because I'm getting so much energy out of my fat fuel tank. So I hope I've explained that all right. But the idea of understanding that was, look, when I'm fat adapted, I'm converting my fat to energy so efficiently that I'm never actually hitting the bottom of my reservoir of my carbohydrates, because I am burning both. So that was kind of it. And look, the other sort of gem here is, look, your body is converting or creating its own glycogen naturally. So it's also, I'm not depleting my carb tank as quickly, but my body is also replenishing it at a rate that is, offsetting what it's being churned through. So once I understood that, it was like, right, all I've got to do here, my game is to adjust my metabolism so that my rate of fat oxidation, the rate at which I'm converting my fat to energy, is so efficient that it is able to compensate for the amount of workload that I'm requiring my body to do. So if you get that equation right, it's like, right, I'm just always I've got enough energy being converted from my fat to from my fat fuel tank to energy at a rate that compensates for that or is sufficient enough, and then we're off to the races. And then it was like, right, how far can we push this? So having that knowledge was really useful for me to be able to go, okay, I understand a little bit behind why this works. It's not just, all right, let's just have a crack and see what happens. It was to exploit that understanding and really push that as far as we could.
And it's a great explanation. And there is, for anybody who's like, oh, well, yeah, there is a study out there, and I reference this study quite often. I believe the title is High Carbohydrate versus Keto Adapted Elite Ultra Endurance Runners. And when they say elite, these were like U.S. Olympic trial level runners. Mm-hmm. And they studied the two side by side, one with a high carbohydrate, your typical runner's diet, and one that was keto adapted, fat adapted. And the number one thing I get from people is glycogen, right? They think if I don't eat carbohydrates, I'm not going to have glycogen. Well, right off the bat, the glycogen stores, because they did, muscle biopsies, the muscle glycogen stores were about the same. They were nearly identical between both groups. I'm like, okay, well, there goes the muscle glycogen thing, right? Like, I have the ability to fill those reservoirs, like you're talking about, without needing to eat. The second, and so these were 3-hour runs that they did, 180 minutes of sub-maximal. I believe their VO2 max was like 68%. Mm-hmm. At the end of the 3 hours, their glycogen depletion was about the same. And then in I believe it was an hour or 2 hours afterwards, they gave the carbohydrate group carbs and they gave the fat adapted group fat as a recovery. And the keto group actually regained their muscle glycogen a little bit faster. But the most interesting one is they also tracked, your fat oxidation rates, and the keto group was like 2.5 times the carbohydrate. And that, like, elite runners, they train that. Like, even the ones that do carbs, they train to try and maximize that fat oxidation, because apparently everybody else knows that's in the space that the more I can utilize fat, the better it's going to be for me.
Yeah.
And so I have, I've gone even further into it, and it's kind of this gray area as to where, because inevitably you have a point where you're going to not be able to fat oxidize fast enough. Mm-hmm. And most of the time it's around like that 80% of your VO2 max. which is fine for marathon runners because most marathon runners are 60 to 70% of their VO2 max.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I try and talk to these people and I'm like, okay, you don't need it. And then they're like, well, if that was the case, then all of the best athletes in the world would eat carbs.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you're not one of the best athletes in the world. Like, you shouldn't eat like an athlete anyway. I mean, let's just look at what athletes do. At some point, I'm going to do a video on this because there's some interesting statistics, namely due to like what athletes will and won't do with no regards for their health. Right? Like Sports Illustrated ran a poll, and it was like 155 of 158 athletes that responded said they would do performance-enhancing drugs if they had no chance of getting caught.
Yeah.
Like this isn't about health, right? Like we're trying to peek out, a couple seconds, and to show how close it is. I'm rambling, but I got a point. I promise.
Yeah.
I watched Chariots of Fire last night. It's the 100-year anniversary of Chariots of Fire, and the world record in 1924 was less than a second slower than the world record is now in the 100-meter dash. So in 100 years, we've improved like 3/4 of a second. Like, so that's how fine of a line that these athletes are trying to get. The average person does not need to change their diet and potentially affect their health for a third of a second, half a second.
Yeah.
So it's this interesting like give and play between, do I want to eat like an athlete to do the absolute maximum performance, or do I want to be able to perform better than 99.8% of the people in the world and still be able to eat this way?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think a lot of the studies that have been done have just call it blindly done them on athletes that have not adjusted their metabolism to run a different way. So it's kind of like if they're not adapted to be able to convert their fat to energy fast enough going into this, of course the results are going to be suboptimal because you're giving them the wrong fuel for what they're adapted for. So, and it takes a long time. Like, it doesn't take long for the average person to adjust and feel the benefits of it. It's like 3 weeks, right? But to actually get that performance level enhancement, like, it takes longer. Like, it takes a few months, and the longer you do it, the better you get. So I think that's the other thing that we need to appreciate is, look, yeah, okay, there aren't world-class athletes doing this now, or they may be, but there haven't been a whole bunch of them. Like, the sheer number of people attempting marathons, what percentage of those are fat adapted? Like, just from the law of numbers there, that you're going to get your outliers within either of those kind of playbooks of being fat adapted or not. You've only got a small subset of people that are even attempting it, that have even done the work prior to sort of earn the right to demonstrate this rate of fat oxidation. So, and look, I think the approach some people do, I'm trying to think of an analogy, and it's a bit clumsy, but the way I think about it, it's like, all right, if everyone in the world swims their 100-meter swim wearing floaties, because floaties are, you need them to, because everyone goes, look, you're going to sink without floaties. It's like, yeah, you probably will. But if you can train your body to go, right, I can learn to swim without them, and you do so, you become an efficient swimmer. Yeah, you're super efficient at it, and you're going to, blast everyone away. Now, people go, yeah, okay, totally get it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave one floaty on because I just don't trust it. So I want to, I'll use one floaty, and I'm going to do everything you say, and I'm going to swim properly. It's like, you know what? You're kind of missing the point. You have to go all in here to be able to commit to becoming fat adapted. And so, to extend that, would make that analogy a little bit more relevant. The floaties here, to state the obvious, is just those carbohydrates. Like, yeah, I'll be fat adapted, but I'm just going to have a few carbohydrates, or I'm going to have like 50 grams or so much every hour. It's like, yeah, you're putting the floaty back on. Like, you need to really just trust the process and trust your body to do what it needs to do.
And it's a really good point, because that was brought up in the study. And I love this study because they explain a bunch of the downfalls of trying to test keto athletes. And, especially, it's tough to test two different groups, right? Because everybody's a little bit different genetically. And so what you would like to do is be able to test the same person, but they illustrated 6 to 9 months. So they're like, anybody that we're doing, they have to have been keto, fat adapted for 6 to 9 months, or it's just not going to be the same. These people that go in and we do a study, if, somebody who's done 4 weeks, yeah, like you said, it's not going to end well. You might feel okay,
Yeah.
but you're not. Fat oxidation is still a trained and a learned. It's almost a skill. Like I don't want to call a human, process a skill, but that's a thing that endurance runners, whether they eat carbs or not, actively are trying to improve.
Yeah.
So to just, take somebody and, it's like if you throw somebody in the pool, they're like, okay, you've done the kiddie pool a few times. Let's go in the Olympic pool and see if you can swim. Of course, it's not going to end well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, and like a lot of people say to me, look, what's your advice for, optimal marathons, or, no one's ever done a sub 3-hour marathon doing it this way and that sort of thing. I'm like, yeah, I know, but give us some time. You need to, like, whether it happens or not, I don't know, but there just hasn't been the amount of kind of attempts or people, like the right people, to have the ability to actually do that. Look, and what I would love to see is someone that is a genuine runner that, runs really sharp times. And we use marathons again as the example, that runs those 3-hour marathons. For me to train to do a 3-hour marathon would take years, and I need to have the right, physiology or basic ability to even get there. But someone that already has that, for them to become fat adapted should be a matter of months. And then, do it for long enough, do it a year or equivalent, 18 months. The results of someone like that, I think it would be very exciting to see them really commit to it and see where they want to go. And I think it will happen in time because, like you said, every athlete wants the edge. And I'm telling you that, it's pretty easy to understand that if you can tap into a fuel source far greater than anyone else and go for longer without having to, refuel, like, in Formula One, if you could get through a race without having to change your tires, like, you'll crush it. So it's like, if we could solve for that, and I think someone will, eventually they will, and that's when the narrative will change. But until we kind of see that and someone is committed to it, it's going to be a lot of theory. But look, what I've done is just pretty aggressively strike through that notion of, just to cover that volume, you need carbohydrates because your body can't, handle it. It's like, sorry, that's done. We're done with that. Absolutely can. And like I said, our bodies are incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the other one I get is the weightlifting. And I actually found a study that did, was looking at glycogen stores of Olympic powerlifters. There's, Brian Shaw. I don't know if you know who he is. I think at one point he had the world record in deadlifts. He's, 6'5", 440 pounds. Like, the dude eats 10,000 calories a day. There's, videos of him dipping cheesecake and chocolate ice cream, like, just, the most ridiculous stuff that nobody should ever follow.
Yeah.
And people will point to it and be like, powerlifters, you have to have carbs, glycogen. What do you think you get your power from? Well, this study that they did, they went through a workout and they measured their glycogen, and all of them burned less than 50% of their glycogen stores through their workout.
Yeah.
I'm like, even if you can fast your workout. You don't need, people have this misconception that you're going to burn through all these glycogen stores super fast. Like, the kind of agreed upon amount of time for you to burn through all of your glycogen stores is 80 minutes at 100% your VO2 max.
Yeah.
Nobody, I saw a stat that like 90% of people over the age of 30 will never sprint again in their life.
Yeah.
And we're worried about burning through glycogen stores doing 80 minutes of the hardest exercise that you've ever done in your life.
Yeah. It's madness. And look, part of, even with my marathons, it's like, right, you can't get through a marathon. I'm like, well, according to, there was a great paper, it was Webster and Noakes, rates of depletion. And it was talking about, like I said, those different rates of oxidation between carbs and fat. And the, I think where I was going with that. So I'm sorry, I have lost my train of thought here. I got stuck on the paper.
No, if you were getting it, I'm a huge fan of Noakes because I believe Noakes was a huge carb guy, right? Like, he was, you have to have carbs, absolutely. You have to have carbs, you have to have carbs. And then the light switched for him, and he's done a ton of research on himself. I believe he has a paper of doing carbs with performance and then giving himself time to fat adapt and then testing it.
Yes.
And he's done a bunch of stuff in that space of you don't need carbs for it.
I recall. So I remember where I was going. We're back on track. So yeah, where I was going with that was, look, in this paper, it says, right, what's the equivalent, given these rates of oxidation and the level of fat stores? How many marathons or how far or how long could you run for before you exhaust those? So, and in my case, with my body composition, it was over 22 marathons, which is an astounding number. So I was like, right, I did 5. According to the science and the papers here, I could do literally 4 times that. So I'm not even close to, like you said in your example of sprinting for 80 minutes at full gas rate. 22 marathons is what we've got here, and we're worried about getting through one, or worried about running for a couple of hours when you've actually got, I think it's 90 odd hours of available energy. It's ludicrous. So once you understand this stuff a little bit, it's like, right, there's a lot of wriggle room here. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's mind blowing to me, the performance aspect. I'm like, and part of, I think, and you're saying once we get somebody that does it, is part of it's the mindset of athletes, right? Like another thing I looked up is the average age of professional athletes, and Major League Baseball is a little bit older. I think that was like 28, but all these other professional athletes are in their early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
Right. So you have a bunch of. I remember when I was 20. As an athlete, I was never a professional athlete, but I was a collegiate athlete, and then I, was strength and conditioning and a D1 coach. Athletes do not care about their nutrition.
Yeah.
Like you hear stories about people who spend, $5 million a year to have their chef fly around with them. And then you read stories of, I don't know how familiar you are with baseball. I use this all the time. David Wells, he's not going to be a Hall of Famer, but he was one of the better pitchers of all time. Mm-hmm. Hits the pinnacle of baseball achievement, throws a perfect game while still drunk from the night before. Athletes do not care, right? Like now you get to the Olympic sprinters. Sure, nobody's sprinting 100 meters. I don't care what you say. You're not sprinting 100 meters.
Yeah.
But athletes, as long as they don't mess up all of their hard work and their health or whatever, they don't care. The Michael Phelps one, that is my perfect example of why we should not eat like athletes. Michael Phelps is arguably the greatest athlete who has ever existed.
Yeah.
I looked up his 10,000. He has the infamous 10,000 calories that he ate in Beijing, the 2008 Olympics. 10,000 calories a day. There were like chocolate chip pancakes, sugar crusted French toast, multiple energy drinks, a pound of pasta, a full pizza, like stuff that no sports nutritionist would recommend.
Yeah.
But guess what? All he cares about is having enough fuel. He does not care about the actual food that's going in, because he's just going to sit there and burn through it.
Yeah.
And so for us to have this notion that we should follow elite athletes' diets based on our own is just insane, which is why I love stuff that you're doing, because you're like, hey, like I'm a normal guy and I can eat this way, feel great, and oh, by the way, run 5 marathons without eating anything.
Yeah. And look, probably another interesting thing, since doing it, a lot of people reached out to me going, oh, this is great. And look, I appreciate you give me the confidence to have a crack and do something, which is, part of it is, look, pass the baton on and have someone else literally run with this. But we recently there was an ultra marathon out here in Sydney in the Blue Mountains, so out here in Australia, and there are a bunch of people that did attempt that. Look, as carnivore, like they gave themselves a bit of a lead into it, and they did it. All of them, the feedback was, look, felt great, it was amazing, like it was really good. And the one thing was like, man, you've solved my problem. In all of these runs, I'm running with a full stomach. I have stomach issues. I needed to find a bathroom along the way. It's like not running with my guts just playing up on me the whole time. Is extremely liberating. Like energy wasn't an issue, and now you've solved this big problem for me, which was, right, am I, I'm kind of strategically thinking, do I need to make a dash to the bush here at any point in time? Because playing that other game, particularly with those gels and the rest, can play absolute havoc on your digestive system, which is not nice. So look, there's some other wins that come along the way here, and like you said, a lot of people eat those gels. They don't need them, but they eat them because the best in the world do it. So it's like, right, I need to do this and just follow exactly what they do. It's like, horses for courses here. Let's have a figure out what's your need, and then we'll address that. I think would be a much more sensible approach.
And what people don't understand is those elite athletes that are doing that have tested their approach to that race so meticulously, right?
Yeah.
Like especially in running, right? In other sports, baseball, like people have routines, right? Michael Jordan ate a steak before every game.
Yep.
But especially when it comes to running, like you better believe that they know exactly what they're eating the 2, 3, 4 days prior, and they know exactly how they're going to respond so that
Yeah.
they know exactly what they need to do throughout. And if you're carb adapted, like that's fine.
Yeah.
But these people who eat their like their everyday life, they're like, oh yeah, I see them doing this. I'm gonna carb load up. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen The Office.
Yes, I love
Yeah,
it.
there's the one where they're doing like the 5K for rabies, right? And Michael Scott's like, you gotta carb up, and he's eating fettuccine Alfredo, like just a bucket of fettuccine Alfredo right before the race, and then halfway through he's like, oh no. And that's just what I envision with people. They're like, oh well, that's what
Yeah.
this guy did, while
Yeah.
having no idea how their body's going to respond.
Yeah.
And like that's the thing about carnivore and keto. You don't have to prep it, right? Like just keep doing what you're doing and then go out and run it, because last I checked, none of these people are trying to do Olympic time trials.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, look, I did my 5 marathons fasted, but the other thing that we kind of ignored, like I did train for this. I did try and put some kilometers in the legs and time in the legs. So like I'd go for 3-hour runs or whatever just to, try and build up some of that resistance. I was way underdone, but to get the amount of strength training in to be able to do 131 miles is it's like takes years. So I was definitely underdone, but I did train. So I've got like scores of training runs where I'm running like completely fasted because I've got a normal life. So I'd be like, right, I can't run during the day because I've got to work. I've got to take the kids to school. So I was like, find the time. So I get up at 4 a.m. and go for a 2-hour run, completely fasted, do the whole thing, come back. And whether I ate or not was depending if I had time or if I was hungry. And half the time, I wasn't. So it's like once you are fat adapted, it's like the whole game changes. Like you don't have to, all these rules that everyone's sticking to just simply don't apply. Like you've got your own rule book. And my big tip is like listen to your own body when you're doing that and work that and figure out what works for you.
And that's the fat adapted. I almost feel like I just harp this, right? It's just fat adapt. But
Yeah.
people ask over and over and over, why don't you eat fruit? Why don't you add stuff back in? And I'm like, honestly, I do fine with fruit. I feel great. Yeah. But that fat adapted, and I don't do long endurance stuff, but the ability to go hiking, right? And be gone for 4 hours and not have to worry about bringing food.
Yeah.
Like that alone. The one story I tell all the time is when I went and got part of my sleeve done, and the guy goes, prepare for 7 hours. And I was like, and the first thought was, what am I going to do for food? Right? Because before I couldn't go that. And then I realized that I had an appointment before. I was like, oh, I'll just eat when I get back. I'll eat in the morning and then I'll eat when I get back. And I went 10 hours, sat through an entire tattoo session, came back, ate, and was totally fine. And I was like, that literally right there is all I need. That is the game changer for me, and why I don't ever want to reintroduce a bunch of fruit, because I have zero interest in getting out of that fat adapted stage.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, like I said, I was super strict coming into this, so pure carnivore, because my goal was so aggressive. It was, you know what, look, I do like fruit, and I think there's a place in for your diet if you're not wanting to be the extreme end of being fat adapted and get the most out of it. Like, absolutely go for it. But for me, it was like, right, I need to be as fat adapted as possible. So why would I eat anything that would compromise that? And eating any carbohydrates or anything sweet is going to compromise my ability to do that. Now, again, I was at the pointy end of it because I'm doing something super extreme, but so I was very disciplined about that, but it became very real for me too. It was actually like, even through all my training in those periods, it would be not like people say that when you take control of your diet, you're obsessing about food. I would say I'm the complete opposite, because I get to the end of my day and I'm like, whoa, I didn't have breakfast this morning, and did I have lunch today? I can't remember, because was that yesterday I had lunch, or I don't remember. No, actually, I didn't have lunch. There's no hunger signal. Like, I'm not thinking about food. I'm not thinking about, all right, how long until my next meal? It's so natural. It's like, right, all of a sudden I feel hungry. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to eat. And I eat a massive meal. I'll eat as much until I'm full. Like, it's so liberating that I'm, out of the rat race of trying to plan my day around those meals. So like you said, look, if I get up early, take the kids to school, and look, if say I'm playing golf or something, I'm playing 4 or 5 hours, then I might push through lunch if I've got time for lunch. None of that I even worry about anymore. I just get up, get going, crush it all day, and then at the end of the day, have a massive meal. And I haven't thought about food the entire time. So it's a very liberating way to free yourself from that mental chore of, right, got to schedule my day. I'm hungry all the time. And am I always thinking about food? I'm like, no, I'm never thinking about food. Like, except for the 5 minutes before when I ate a massive meal. Like, that's it.
That's you hit it on the head. That's a great segue out. For fear of running too long talking to you, this has been great, dude. Where can people find your stuff, your social medias, information about you?
Yeah, sure thing. So my website's probably the best. So ketomarathons.com. I've got all my information around how I went about my marathons, my training prior, including my nutrition and everything, including updates of every single one. I've all my data on there of everything I tracked. I went over the top there trying to measure everything. So got some great stuff there. So go to ketomarathons.com. And then I do post on socials, mainly on Insta, where my handle is @ketomarathons. So I regularly post there, but you can also find me on X at keto_marathons. But yeah, look, and my message is, look, honestly, if what I've done does nothing other than inspire you to give being fat adapted a go, please have a crack at it. Don't do it for just 2 days and go, it didn't work for me. You have to put in, and you have to do it for enough time to get through that period of, it's not keto flu, it's carb withdrawal is what it is, and get through that period. So do it. And I would say, look, 30 days, give it 30 days, 3 weeks to 30 days, and commit. And at the end of that period, you will know just what it feels like to be fat adapted. And I'm telling you, it is an absolute life-changing experience. So, so please check me out, ketomarathons.com. I can walk you through that. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, this has been a pleasure. Ever since I think it was an interview I did with Bart K, actually, that mentioned you, and I was like, I gotta look this up, like, because that's fascinating to me. Like, that's not just your everyday life. Like 99.9% of these people are just trying to live everyday life.
Yeah,
and that is not everyday life. And to show that you don't have these drawbacks from a performance standpoint, I think is fascinating for everybody to see. So I really appreciate you being on, Alex. I thank everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week.